Hello and welcome to the next episode. Last time we have talked about goods and everything like in the economy, and we are going to continue talking about the economy itself because it's one of the major features of this mod. And we are going to look deeper into certain aspects of the economy here, which is autonomy. Now, I already mentioned autonomy multiple times. For example, when talking about taxation. Let's recall, for example, noble dues was a taxation that can be used to extract wealth, therefore money, from your nobility in a province by the taxation. And the cost is depending on the noble wealth itself, which can be extracted, but the cost is increased by the noble loyalty and the local autonomy. Now, we already know how we can fix loyalties of nobility by the interactions here. But what about the autonomies? So if we use the natural map mode here of local autonomy, which everybody has here, we can see that my realm of Yemen, which I'm using as a showcase here, has different autonomies all around. And that, of course, has to do with the political shape-up of our realm again, and also a lot of other things. Now, most notably, if we look into a province itself, let's take Aden here, we have the autonomy down here, and we see a lot of modifiers here which impact this. And first of all, what we already know is legitimacy has an impact on local autonomy, but also our bureaucratic administration of the realm has an impact. So basically there are reforms in here, when we reform our administration, which provide autonomy reduction. Let's find one. This one, for example, the bureaucratic hierarchy is reducing global autonomy when we reform this, if we do this reform, basically. That's one way of reducing autonomy globally in every province you have. And also, what plays a role, which is very important to note here, is the power of your estates and their loyalty. So basically, if your estates like you, so for example, my nobility here is at a loyalty of 65 and a power of 75, if I were to annoy them and the loyalty goes down, not only is the taxation cost increasing, also the autonomy is going up. Because the more power they hold in this province, the more stuff they can corrupt. And for example, we can see here in the elites, like what is actually in this province, as we already saw earlier. And the loyalties of these elites in this province play a role on the autonomy in the end. And of course our administration, so the bureaucratic administration, also plays a role. But that's basically indirectly here, based on the other estates and elites which are present, basically. So, and therefore you have the 2 or 3 major factors which can be seen here directly. Legitimacy is reducing it. The bureaucratic reforms increase it, usually. So you have to reform to get rid of these increases, and therefore you reduce it. You also have centralization, which we're going to look at next. Then there's the thing which is called CE, communication efficiency, which we're going to look at as well. And there's the elites, which I just mentioned. So here they are relatively powerless in my capital, because the state is strongest here. It's my capital, so the elites do not have a lot of say. But let's go to, for example, Verona here, relatively newly conquered province at 100 autonomy. We can see here that the elites have a bit more power here. It's not that much right now, but it could be a lot higher. Separatism also plays a role. Let's go to Madagascar, maybe something is here with a higher factor on... Yeah, elites are not that big in my realm here, but they will be bigger if you start earlier. So I already reformed a lot, so they do not have that much of a say currently. Now, talk about the next value here is centralization. That's also something you can manage relatively easily. It's a value here in the government tab, and you have here the centralization. So for example, my centralization is still going up to the maximum of 60. And this leads to just basically multitude of modifiers. And one of them is the autonomy change globally, basically for all of your provinces. But it also gives you technology reduction costs, but increases your core creation costs, for example, but also has impacts on your armies by giving more morale. But also it's a very hefty impact on national unrest, so you really want some idea groups which reduce your unrest to counter the effects of centralization. How can you get a higher cap of centralization? Pretty much by doing the devolution here, tier 6 reforms. So most of the states you start with are feudalism, therefore they are really feudalized and decentralized. You start here, which basically gives you no additional centralization cap. But when you go to significant decentralization, today I can't speak, seriously, you already get plus 20 cap and a higher monthly change, basically a yearly change. And currently I'm already on equal responsibilities, where I get plus 40 on my cap and plus 0.3. But as you can see here, the conditions for having that is that you're either a republic or theocracy, or you have 20 state reach, basically. And you have also here in equal responsibilities, for example, the condition to have 40 state reach. And yeah, so that's basically what you can do here. And at some point I want to go into a variable, which is 60 state reach, which I need. And I also need to be on unitary, which is, for example, this one, which I already got here. So there are some dependencies between internal structure and the devolution here, which you need to check out what you need to do, which ones here. But basically they are all tied to certain amounts of state reach and your taxation laws, basically. So how well is your state in control of your provinces? How well can it tax them? And then it will allow you to centralize this even further, therefore reducing costs and making your taxation even if more efficient when your centralization goes up. And that's basically the two things you can do to increase centralization. I would recommend that you try to get at least to the first significant decentralization status here as fast as possible, so 20 state reach, which will not corrupt you too much, but it's very useful to get so that you can get some significant reductions of autonomy from there. Because reforming your estates is a very slow process, getting 20 state reach is relatively fast early game by either going after the tribes, which offer you the interaction of expanding authority, therefore getting your 2.5 state reach blank every 10 years, yeah. And then you can do the interaction with direct democracy to increase your state reach even further, so you can get there relatively quickly. But reforming all the nobility stuff and clergy stuff can take a long time, because you're basically tied to one reform every 10 years if you want to be constantly destabilized by doing the reforms, which you maybe can't afford if you're a lot at war, for example. Now, that's some sources of autonomy, basically. Another source of autonomy, of course, are idea groups that you can do. For example, if you go into the empire idea, you of course also get some autonomy reduction globally. There are other idea groups. I think administration also gives you something somewhere. No, it gives you a modifier. Here, there is one. And it also gives you a CE modifier, communication efficiency, what we are going to talk about now. Communication efficiency is literally the distance from your capital to your provinces. So basically, if it's close to your capital, the communication efficiency is good. So for example, our capital here, it's this UI icon here with many plus signs here currently. It's perfect because we are in the capital. If we, for example, now go... let's change the song, please. That's a little too crazy for this explanation here. If we go to Lahish here, which is one step further away, we can see here that it's superb 93% of the efficiency that you can have. So basically the maximum amount you can get is -1 autonomy change from communication efficiency. And we already lost basically 0.1 here from going one step further. If we already go to Sana here, we are already at, where is the icon here? 45%. So we already lost 55% of our autonomy factor here. And that's only some steps away. However, it's quite complicated to get from Aden to Sana here because of the terrain. So that plays a role. Most of this is highlands and mountains and stuff, or you have to go by ship and then from there, which is the next factor we are talking about. Because it's a coastal province, and any coastal province can do this, we can go by ship and therefore, for example, communicate with Zila here. Zila, for example, has a communication efficiency of 78%, so it's better than Sana, because it's just one ship length away, basically, so you can just go over there. Both provinces have a harborage infrastructure, so they have a harbor, so they can actually trade and communicate with each other properly. And then from Zila, we would go inwards here to these other provinces, which of course have a much higher communication efficiency. Again, so for example, this province here, a lot of minuses, is already at 0%. So we are not getting any bonuses to our autonomy reduction here. That's why this province is almost at 100% actually. And this way, you really have to manage your distances. And keep in mind that, for example, if you conquer stuff far away, it will always be very autonomous in your realm. And even if we look at our realm here, we can see that the inlands part of Yemen are extremely hard to govern already, because it's very difficult to get there due to all the nasty terrain here, mountains and stuff. Because if you check out the terrain, let's take Ib for example, because it's a terrible one. It's shrub mountains, and we can see here in the bottom there is a terrain factor for CE. So standard one for each terrain is a factor of 1, so nothing changes. But topography is adding a 2.75 factor to it, and a forest cover factor of 1.15. So basically, you get worse in these terrains. You get your, whatever, let's call him the envoy who's traveling here, will get slower in this province. And therefore, if it's all mountains in here, the communication is extremely slow, and therefore your efficiency is dropping down significantly towards Sana as well, and so on. So in-game we call it runner. You can even see here the runner origin is 474, which means that the communication from our capital to Sana is going through Tiamat, which is the coastal province here, and this coastal province is receiving it from 388, and 388 is Aden itself. So basically our envoy or our traveler, or our runner here, is going from our capital to Tiamat here, and from Tiamat to Sana. So if we want to improve this chain here of provinces, we can, for example, improve the harborages here to be faster by ship to Tiamat, which we could also improve in their harborages. And then we could improve the road network between these two provinces, where we currently only have a level 1 pathing, which is basically a primitive road network here. So we could improve this to get the communication efficiency even lower, better in the end. How we do the infrastructure and how it's all related to everything, I will explain in a separate episode, in fact the next one. But I just already want to lay the idea here in your heads that the efficiency depends on your infrastructure, like the harborages or your pathings, therefore your road networks. And now in my realm here, you can see that the autonomies look like this currently. And if we go into the special map modes here, which is the CE map mode, and we are going to look at it, you can see that it's roughly similar to the autonomy actually. So we can see that the best ones are of course here close to the capital around Aden. And then you can see that the further we go inland, the worse it gets, because we didn't build roads so far. And also here the inlands part of Somalia are basically not reached at all by our communication. And also the inlands of Madagascar are not reached. So we only have a ship connection basically here. So we can see that our communication efficiency here is 34%, which can be improved if we get better harborages here or in Aden itself. or along the way actually. For example, we could check out where this province trades with, or where it gets your stuff from, and it gets from 388, which is Aden. So we move directly from Aden to here and get therefore the distance value here. And there's not much we can do except for harborage infrastructure. Oh, the UI is a little bugged here. Let's take this one. Yeah, it doesn't have a harborage here. And it also receives from 388 directly. So we could build a harborage here, and then it would get significantly better. And actually, do we have anything here? Yeah, for example, so we have a province over here in the Philippines, which is at poor communication, 19%. But it's still 19% despite being like half a globe away already. So you really can improve by harborages your reach. So we had harborage infrastructure 4 here, which is of course quite high already. And yeah, that's basically one of the main factors you need to consider. In the early game, you always want to keep an eye on what you want to conquer and how far away it is. Because the only things you can influence relatively quickly are your legitimacy of the ruler. So you want to have legitimate rulers. To a certain degree, centralization, because you can get it up relatively quickly. You even have a policy to increase it. I think I'm running it actually. Yeah, centralize the state. So to make it go up faster. And then you can, to a certain degree, start building up infrastructure. For example, in your capital, that's always a good idea to get a harborage here, if you have a harborage. So, for example, if you play in Hungary, you want to start on road networks, of course, and not harborages, to a certain degree. And therefore, manage your autonomy that way. Now, what's also very important to note is that there are also rivers which can be reached by ship. So, for example, if we go from Aden, we can also go to inland into certain regions if there is a navigable river. For example, if we were to conquer here up this Indian River, then we could do this directly by having harborage infrastructure on this river. And that would be something so where we can get decent autonomies from it, for example. The same is here, for example, for the Nile. So all the great rivers of the world, which are to a certain degree navigable, can be reached in this way. So basically, if you, for example, have a province here, let's say you have the coastal province here, Basra, then you can communicate upwards to Mosul here by ship, therefore being a lot faster than someone who needs to run that distance by foot, for example, or horse. And if you check out Europe, you have, of course, the large river networks here in the eastern part, which is, for example, the Danube, the Elbe, and all the other things here in Eastern Europe, but also like the Rhine network here, and the Seine, and all the major rivers which can be used for this. Also here in Western Africa, you have some major rivers which can be used by ship. And for example, in my campaign here, what would be interesting is, for example, the river networks here in the south, which I could use if I want to conquer it. Then I can make harborages here at the coast and therefore project everything inwards if I want to. Or the same here in the Indian parts. And that is very important to know because ship is always faster than road, basically. However, you sometimes have realms like the Ottomans here, where you can only reach parts of it by ship, and you also have parts which can only be reached by road. Or Hungary is the same. So basically Hungary also has the Danube river system here in the center, but if you go into the eastern parts of Wallachia here, or Transylvania, you won't reach it. You really need roads for this. Spain is also very important to have roads, basically because there is no major river system which can be used for this. Yeah, and that's basically the main reasons why what you need to do to decrease your autonomy in your provinces and therefore get more out of them. And this is a very important part to consider because if you lose a lot of legitimacy, your autonomy will go up significantly. So for example, our legitimacy of 80 reduces the autonomy by 0.15. That is quite a lot. In combination with the distances from your capital, this can play a big role. And yeah, you really want to keep an eye out for this. And also maybe hunt some ideas to reduce autonomies directly if you, for example, have a very large pathing or road-based country. There are also, for example, idea groups like logistics here, which reduce the costs to build these kind of road networks. Here, for example, pathing infrastructure costs and harborage infrastructure costs. But there are also idea groups like administrative, which immediately give 10% reduction to CE. So basically your guys are running faster, or they are better organized in the end. And there's also one in diplomacy, I think. Maybe it was diplomacy. Yeah, there's also another 10% reduction here in diplomacy. So these are also quite nice if you have a large realm which you need to manage. So you can reach them better and therefore have lower autonomies and therefore higher taxation in your provinces. And in the next episode, we are going to look at infrastructure itself. So all the stuff we have been talking about here, we are going to look at in the next one.